Before we move into the proceedings of the program, let me call here Professor Ahmed, who is the in charge director. Could you please come here? Professor Thomas Waugh, who is going to be with us for the next 10 days, or what seems to be a very intensive 10 days course. Professor Boisha, who is the Dean Academic. Dr. Singh, who is the head of the Department, Humanities and Social Sciences. Yeah, welcome again, all of you, for being here. We are still awaiting a few of the participants, but anyway, we should start. But first of all, let us felicitate the guests. I think yeah, so we'll begin with Professor Thomas Waugh. Sarita, who's our departmental student, will felicitate Professor Waugh with the Assamese towel. Can I request other gifts? Okay, Professor Ahmed. Professor Baisha. And Dr. Singh. Thank you, Sarita. We'll do the protocol-wise Thanksgiving session. Yeah, I'd like to thank MHRD first, which is very commonsensical, as you realize, for the money and grant for making this happen. Of course, thanks to all the participants. Most of you have traveled a long way. And then, so sorry. I think these are the participants who are stuck in the traffic or somewhere, and they're impunctual, and then they're now trying to call up. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, thanks for the participants for being here, and I thank Professor Patwari, who unfortunately is not here because he's out of station, who happens to be the local Gyan coordinator, who has been a constant source of support. Like all the materials that we proposed and all have been routed through him, you will get to meet during the valedictory session. And then our director, Professor Rajat Gupta, who is not again here, and he sent us an email in the morning, a congratulatory note and all of that. So thanks to Professor Gupta. Thanks to the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. I think you will get to meet some of our wonderful colleagues during the next few days. You will be here, so people will be off and on. And Dr. Singh is here, who I'll ask to say a few words about the department and so on. Professor Ahmed, who is the in-charge director, the dean, the academic, for sparing their time and being here. Our wonderful account staffers who provided and will continue to provide support for all the accounts-related stuff, and the people, the camera person, the people who have taken care of the venue, the janitors, and all the support staff who had lent their hand in making this event the way we have been able to run it the way it is now. So can I request now Professor Ahmed to speak a few words, like introductory remarks.
Thank you, Abhishek. Good morning, everybody. Professor Thomas Waugh from Canada. You are very much welcome to our institute. As the research director, on behalf of the institute and my personal way, I welcome the institute, particularly northeastern region of India. Might be this is your first visit. Thank you very much for visiting us, and I hope next 10 days we'll enjoy with our participant and share your extremely valuable knowledge with the participants. Thank you, sir, again for coming here. And the participant is very few. I do not understand the reason why it is like that, because particularly GAN course, many of the courses I have attended. Anyway, most of the program, the participants were full in the hall. Particularly this program, I'm saying that very less number of participants. Anyway, whoever is there, thank you very much for participating in this program. I will just like to tell that, see, such type of expert who is having knowledge this particular aspect, it's difficult to get. So, my earnest request to you that during these 10 days, please just do not go on listening. Try to interact with the expert, try to interact personally in the class, so that you can be benefited, or rather we can be benefited as a society. As a human being and as a society, we can be benefited from it. That should be the ultimate goal of this program. And another issue of the GAN course is making the networking. That is another main objective of the GAN course. It's not only this 1 week or 10 days of program, give and take policy. Somebody is speaking very nicely and we are listening. It's not only the program. After this program is over, how could we make the network and go further research? That is another main objective of the GAN course, as far as I know, Vishal. So, main objectives are two. First is, during this program, earn as much benefit or gain as much benefit as from the expert, and make a cordial relationship, network with him as well as his colleagues. Not only him, his colleagues. Whoever is working globally, try to make the network with them and utilize the network for your benefit, for the benefit of the country. That is the basic objective. I'd like to congratulate the organizers. Try to level base to earn some more participants. That is my request. And try to see that Professor Thomas is coming from so long distance. His food habit might not be, definitely is not adjustable to this local food habit, to see that something like that he does not feel out of his home, because he is staying here for 10 days. Please look after him. Okay, anyway, my request to you is that just see the well-being. See, he is not uncomfortable, as well as the outside participant who are staying in the guest house. With this, I again hope that the program will be successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ahmed. I think I should share this small anecdotal information here. Professor Waugh had a knee transplant, and at one point of time, we were really wondering whether he would be able to make it. So, a special note of thanks for Thomas Waugh for having made it here. And as you see, there's a stick here, and we were really anxious whether he would be able to make it. Anyway, over to Professor Boisha, if you could say a few introductory words.
Thank you, Abhishek. Professor Ahmed, Professor Wall from Canada, Dr. Sheen, my other colleagues, and my dear participants. We are really thankful to Professor Wall, who has agreed and come a long distance from Canada to here to share the knowledge and the vast experience he has for our benefit. It's really painful. Participation in this program is very few. I do not know the reason. Normally, inauguration is just to welcome the participants. But the attendance of the participants is not encouraging for us. The Gyan course, the pain, the coordinator, the local coordinator has taken to arrange such a course, we should realize it. And also the funding, a lot of fund involves. So someone is paying for us and we should take advantage of this. This facility is made available to us to learn something, to upgrade our knowledge, to enhance our research ability and outcome. We should keep this in mind. I do not know the reason we were discussing why participation in this program, inauguration program, is thin. Anyway, at least those who are present, I feel that they are serious. They will utilize this 2 weeks stay of such an expert here, and our objective of the GAN course, learning is obviously the first one. Other objective is, I think, research. That we should highlight and keep in mind. This is my request to all the participants. Just for the sake of participation, okay, we all understand that also, but we should act accordingly. Just for the sake of participation, we should not be participated. And as I used to say, learning and teaching, these are even though correlated, but independent. So learning is the responsibility of the participants. You should be careful for that. If you learn, only then we'll be happy because then only this program will be treated to be successful. I hope, I am not pessimistic of course, this course will be a successful course. I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Professor Boisha, for your encouraging words. Can I request now Dr. Singh to say a few words?
Respected Director in charge, Ahmed, Professor Ahmed, Dean Academic, Professor Baisa, and today's program's resource person, Thomas Wang. First of all, I would like to welcome you all for the GAN course from the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. Though the department is very small in this, the Technical Institute, the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, though they have a major role to play, but normally it is very small in size in terms of the manpower that is there. But I'm fortunate enough, and we are lucky that this is the third GAN course that we have in the department under the leadership of this Abhishek that we have conducted. Now, our professors, and they are talking about the less number of participants. And one of the main reason that what I feel why the number of participant is very low is because most of the colleges and in the Assam University, the semester exam is approaching, and for us also, the like many of our scholar, the exam is going on. So that may be one of the reason. Anyway, want to know, no matter how many numbers are here, I hope that these 10 days programs will benefit all the participants and also will interact with the resource persons, and it will be utilized in a very fruitful manner. With this, I would like to lastly wish the program a grand success. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Picking up a thread from what Dr. Singh, from where Dr. Singh left, I think many of us, myself included, and most of the faculties who are here, I think you would realize that we have evaded our invigilation duties to be here, myself included. That's one thing. And the other reason the humanities courses in particular, we have less students compared to the engineering courses because we do not have a master's programs. In other words, we cannot threaten our own students to come and do the course. So that's the other reason. But anyway, so can I now request Professor Ahmed to felicitate Professor Wow with small Assamese souvenirs, which is a cap, which in Assamese is called the jabi. And with a wooden rhinoceros. Thank you so much. I think with this we'll conclude the inaugural session, but before we move on, a couple of quick announcements. First, a group photo, which is mandatory, has to be taken right here, number one. Number two, there's some refreshment right outside. We'll meet for small refreshment for 5-10 minutes, and then we'll reconvene here right after that. And before we move on to the lecture, make sure that you sign off and complete the registration thing. There will be a piece of paper on the desk right there, so you just sign off when you reconvene for the lecture. Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's very good. All the participants, please. How are you, sir? What?
Oi, Udit. Oral চলছে ওরালের জায়গা হয় না জায়গা হয় না ঠিক দেব না
Did I wear this or take it off?
Take it off, I think. I'm better. Atar was one more.
प्रगति
Abhishek, would you like the parting word, or I will just jump into the fray?
I think that would be just fine. That's all the formalities
We've had the formalities, so now we start the informalities, all right?
Question is knowledge informal?
And what is the answer? We will know in 10 days.
Yes.
Okay, I think we're going to get started. Good morning, everyone. It's okay? It's good. Rajni and I were just working on the seating plan, and I think we greatly improved things, but perhaps you gentlemen at the back would want to join the front circle. You're fine? Okay. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank Abhishek for, he's been working on this for at least a year, right? Or more than a year? A year and a half?
No, I think we proposed the course last February.
So it's been a lot of work.
Less than a year.
And everyone knows raising money from the central government, no matter what country you live in, is hard work. So
Humanities in particular.
he's very good at it, and thank you so much for that.
He's just made you compliment.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Everyone is so welcoming and friendly. I think it's going to be a great 2 weeks. So I have tweaked the title that you can see in front of you. I put square brackets in the word moving in front of the word images to clarify my own emphasis that will be taking place in this seminar. I think that this title will evolve over the next 2 weeks in any case. It was originally a compromise that Abhishek and I came up with, a way of combining his interest in philosophical discourses of visual studies and my own interest in film studies, the history of cinema, the textuality of cinema, and in particular two areas of film studies, social documentary or committed documentary, which we are calling social practice, and sexual representation, which we are calling affect. So we will be using, or I will be recycling a lot of my recent research in this seminar. And I'm already starting to tweak the title. My last book on the documentary filmmaker Joris Evans was called The Conscience of Cinema, Evans 1912 to 1989. So I'm thinking maybe the word conscience would be a good word to add to our title. Also, to imply, I think, the political and ethical role of cinema in our culture and society. So let's keep that in mind as well. And we're going to be using Evans as a kind of case study when we think about cinema as a social practice. So today we're just going to sum up some of the issues around visuality, modernity, and the 20th century. It's basically going to be a historical study. We're not going to touch the 21st century very much, except maybe in your assignments that we will be sharing in the very last class. So we're talking about the 20th century, and there is a picture of Evans in the 1920s using one of the new German hand movie cameras that changed the way the cinema was made that almost 100 years ago made it a much more mobile and bodily practice. So I think this image of him with his favorite camera, his handheld portable movie camera, is a good image to maybe symbolize what we're going to be doing in this seminar. We're going to be going through 2 lectures today, each 1 hour. So we'll finish the first one at noon and then start up the next one at 12:30. Does that sound all right, Abhishek? So we'll be running a half an hour late. Then we'll have a long lunch break and reassemble at 4 o'clock for a 2-hour screenings session. I insisted that we have a screenings session every day, a 2-hour screening session, so that we look at the screen, look at the moving images that we will be talking about, and share that experience as a group. Cinema was designed to be a collective experience, not to be seen downloaded from illegal sites. It was meant to be shared as a group, and this is what we're going to be doing every evening at 4 o'clock. So I hope everyone is happy with that idea. And we'll start that today at 4 o'clock. Any questions about the format? 2 1-hour lectures in the morning, reading session in the evening. Any questions about that? Abhishek is also proposing that normally we have a break on Sunday, but he's proposing that we have a session on the last Sunday because he's going to be out of station the following day.
Not the last Sunday.
The first.
As per the schedule what we have now, it's a Sunday off. The coming Sunday is off. So I was wondering if we could scrap it with the schedule of the 6th. So we'll have 6th as off, and then we'll have.
Say with this.
No, the coming Sunday, whatever day it is.
So why don't we all think about this proposal, and maybe we'll make a decision collectively this afternoon. This Sunday is December the 3rd. Yeah, and you're proposing that we meet as normal on December the 3rd?
Correct.
And then
6th as a norm.
And 6th is a Wednesday, we would take that day off.
Correct.
So everyone think about that, and we decide, we'll make a decision about this afternoon, all right? Now you see at the bottom of the screen, first, a short screening to get us in the mood. And I want to plunge right into moving images on the screen to get us in the mood. It's a 20-minute film made 70 years ago by Evans in Australia with a community of Indonesian expatriates in Australia. Evans had just been fired from his posh job with the colonial administration, what was then known the Dutch East Indies. The victorious allies in the war had promised independence to all the colonial regimes in Asia, but all of the colonial powers were having second thoughts, including the Netherlands. So they fired Evans, and General MacArthur, the American general who in charge of the Allied effort in the Pacific, said there's no way you're going to let that communist into the Dutch East Indies. So Evans was fired, was stuck in Australia, made a little 20-minute, zero-budget film with these Indonesian expatriates and the unions of the waterfront in Sydney and Brisbane. So in many ways, it anticipates the 21st century zero-budget cell phone activist films that you're all familiar with, made 70 years ago. And I thought it would be just a glimpse of mid-20th century cinema that will sort of establish a kind of historical perspective. Of course, it's also very relevant to you as Indian scholars and intellectuals, because the Indonesian independence movement was very much parallel and had a different outcome, though, from the Indian independence movement, which was also full-fledged in 1946. I believe 1946. The plans were already afoot for Indian independence that came the following year. So it's a key moment in 20th century history. I think that you will really appreciate sharing. So we are going to move right into that. And I hope that all the connections are there. And we'll have the lights completely off, please. All the lights completely off, including this one. Can we turn this light on? This is not being podcasted. We are now off.
That is also a point. Just want to camera off. Camera.
So we'll start as soon as this light is off and as soon as the mute video is on. Is this light being turned off?
No, it is
Okay, obviously, one of the reasons I selected that is because the Indians are the heroes, right? And I thought you would enjoy that. Did anyone understand the Hindi? Was it clear enough in there? Yeah? I'm sorry the sound was so bad. Abhishek, can we get the sound fixed before the 4 o'clock screening and make sure the image is light and it's too dark, okay?
Sound, I'm not very sure. Sound, yeah,
let's talk a little bit about the origins of the seminar, a little bit of the background. I like to see this as an interdisciplinary, intercultural, intergenerational encounter. There is my university with its style of architecture and your university with its style. What is that style? Would you call it post-colonial bungalow institutional? Is that what that is? And mine is sort of 60s brutalism and 90s postmodern. I think the architectural clash is an interesting one, and hopefully the encounter that we have in the next 2 weeks will create a lively dialogue, intergenerational also, because film studies is very much a 20th century discipline emerging in the 1960s and 70s, and Abhishek's discipline of visual studies being very much a more recent disciplinary phenomenon. So together, I think we've come up with a plan that will be very lively. Two things I want to do before we plunge into, we'll come back to talking about this little film in a short while, but first of all, I want to do 3 things. First of all, get to know you a little bit better. I've met almost all of you, but I would like all of us to meet each other in case there are people who don't know each other. Can we just take a few minutes to go around the room? Everyone announce, please, their names and where you're from and what your discipline is and your research. Can we do that? Who would like to start? Will you start?
Hello everyone, my name is Sanjita Acharjee. I'm from Shillong. I have completed my master's from Day-1 University in Mass Communication and Journalism.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Rajni. I'm also from Shillong. I work in a college. This is my area of study. I do visual communication with undergrad students. My research area is social media and identity, and I'm particularly looking forward to benefit from this course and understand visuals a little more and films a little more. That's my expectations of the course.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Madhurika Chaudhary from Department of English, Faculty of Arts, MS University, Baroda, Gujarat. My areas of interest are quite ranging from science fiction to poetry, gender, and of late I am guiding a student who is working on painting. So that made me come to the course.
Hi, I'm Neha and I'm from Calcutta. I'm a PhD scholar here at MIT Silchar, and I'm working on network societies. My background though is media studies, but right now I'm working on network societies and citizenship in network societies.
Hello everyone, I'm Hemant Opara. I'm a faculty in the English department in Asar College here in the Silchar. And though I teach English, I have a little bit interest in the film studies also. I'm associated with the theater, so I have joined this course.
Thank you. That's a good idea. Let's use the mic.
Hello everyone, I'm Pragati Datta. I have completed my master's from Dibrugarh, and I have also completed my MPhil Right now I'm working in a college, Navin Chandra College in Budapur. I am a research scholar here in Humanities Department, NIT Silchar, and I have just entered my coursework. So till now I have not narrowed down on any area that I will be doing for my PhD, but still I'm exploring many areas. Thank you.
I'm Viju. I'm from IIT Madras, a PhD scholar in film studies. I'm from Kerala. I completed my PG in Moscow.
Hello, I'm Shutanuka Banerjee. Actually, I teach in Humanities and Social Science Department as a contractual faculty here. And my research area is actually gender studies. And I am much interested in gender and sexuality issues. So this is.
You must have noticed how patriarchal the film was. In fact, I'll tell you gossip about the female scriptwriter whom I met years later. I think she was the old, well, and a woman camera person as well. So it's not as patriarchal as it looks.
As it seems.
Yeah.
Morning, myself, Dr. Ratan Kumar from Mizoram, and my area of studies is drama and stories.
Hi everyone, my name is Nilotpal. I'm doing my PhD work in the Department of Mass Communication at Assam University. My area of work is basically on looking after the media and digital literacy.
Namaskar, Professor Thomas. First of all, I welcome you to India and NIT Silchar.
Thank you.
My name is Neil Gautam. I head the training and placement in NIT Silchar. I'm a software developer by background, and right now also I'm into management. My research work is parallelly in leadership, and also somehow associated with media studies, because I interview, like you, I said, some leaders for my leadership studies, business leaders. So we'll catch up.
Great. Yes.
Hi, I'm Abhishek. I teach in the Department of Humanities and Social Science. No, many of you do not. I haven't met some of you who came late. But anyway, I teach in the Department of Humanities and Social Science, and I've been in touch with you through emails for a long time. Okay, and then I work on, broadly speaking, visual studies, cultural studies, and so on.
And he did his PhD in Canada.
But we didn't know each other though, except for we met briefly at Concordia once, but then we have a common friend.
But Canada is not responsible for any deviations that may present in his work.
Hello everybody, I'm Vandana Hausen. I'm a faculty of Gurucharan College, that's in Silchar itself. My area of interest is gender studies. I'm currently working on women's representation in the folk tales of the Dimasas, that's the tribe I belong to. And this is in fact the first time that I'm attending a seminar, a work on this, on visual arts. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope to learn a lot, Professor Thomas. It's been an interesting start. Looking forward to it.
Hello everybody, I'm Arjun Chaudhary. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of English in GC College, Gurucharan College. My research areas, interests include cultural and memory studies and the moving image, as well as the photographic image. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Shanchari Bhattacharya. I'm enrolled in the PhD program here, so I'm one of the students actually here in the Department of HSS, Humanities and Social Sciences. I completed my Masters and MPhil from Jadavpur University, Kolkata, and my research interests conclude politics of tolerance, asceticism, ethos of renunciation, and so on. Thank you.
Are you at the back? One of our... No?
It's not a...
Okay. So thank you, everyone. I'm looking forward to getting to know you all even more. Maybe I should also introduce my most recent work. Almost on the way to the airport, I submitted my most recent book. It was really tight meeting that deadline, but I forced myself. Before I came to Silchar, I have to submit this book to the publisher. It's anthology of 30 articles by various authors on confessionality, on confession, first-person media culture, and it's not so much 20th century. It's in fact the last generation. It covers the last generation of media, arts, and culture in the first-person identity, sexuality, artistic work. So on my next visit to Silchar, I hope to be bringing a copy of this book that usually takes about a year or more to publish, as you probably know. So that's the latest on me. Learning approaches. I'm very glad that we arranged the seating a little bit better, because the word that came up in the introductions, interactive, is very important to me. I have a Bengali friend in Montreal who warned me that Indian graduate students will not enjoy being interactive, that you'll have to change your teaching method. And I said, I'm going to prove you wrong. And I already have a strong sense that this is going to be a very interactive group and that there will be an important dialogue ongoing. And in fact, the inaugural speeches this morning, they surprisingly emphasized that from engineers, right? I was very interested to hear the word interactive from our administrator this morning, so I think that was a good sign. So interactive, and as I've already mentioned, we are going to have at the center of our, back on, or is it okay? It's all right. I forgot. It's okay. It's very important for us to be in touch with the works that we are discussing, to encounter cinematic images throughout this seminar, and that's why I've insisted. I've been harassing poor Abhishek for a year about the screening conditions in this room, and I think they've already borne fruit, because I think it was a nice experience seeing this film with you just now, and this is just the beginning. Also, I've been assigning readings. Hopefully most of you had a chance to look at the readings for today. I know it's a very tight and intensive schedule. I hope that you'll be able to look at the readings before coming to class each day, as well as attending the screenings. I don't know whether you'll have time to sleep over the next 2 weeks because of the readings and the screenings, but I hope you'll manage. I asked Abhishek how many pages of readings that we can reasonably expect you all to do. I thought maybe between 50 and 100, and he told me 30. So you have him to be thankful for, but I have sort of gone a little bit over 30 every once in a while, and moreover, I've given you all recommended readings in case that you would like for your own work to pursue some tangential areas. That said, Abhishek and I talked about having you do some assignment work on your own if you would like to be graded in the seminar. And what I have in mind is the following. In the very last meeting, we will have you, those of you who choose to do this, to present a short presentation in the last class, either jointly developed with a colleague or an individual presentation. What I have in mind is selecting a short work that is available on the internet and have you make, we'll discuss this further later on today and tomorrow, have you make some analytic comments or reflections on the work as your assignment. Does that sound as if that will work? Yes?
Can we do the presentation, like, can I shoot a film and a short film and do a presentation?
Absolutely, and I would say maybe we should limit it to 10 minutes per project. Does that sound all right? Okay, and can I have a sense from you how many of you would like to be credited for this seminar and will therefore be doing this, the assignment? So it's about half of you will be doing this assignment, and the rest of you can do it on a voluntary basis as well. Okay, the syllabus. About half of you have your a few of you have your laptops open. Should the rest of you be also bringing your laptops so we can look at the readings if necessary, or should we print out the syllabi for you, or Abhishek is an ecological warrior, so he has been warning us all about not using paper. Okay, so just briefly, the syllabus lists the readings, and you also have a list of the screenings. The screenings are semi-open to people who might be interested, so bring along your friends if you would like. And I think we've covered the basic territory. Did anyone have any questions as they looked at the syllabus? Is everything crystal clear? Okay. The reading for today by Martin J. Scoping Regimes of Modernity was suggested by Abhishek, and I found it a very interesting article. It was written in the 1980s about visual culture of the period of modernity. He talks quite a bit about painting and photography and never once references cinema, or maybe he once references cinema once, but the language he's using actually, in fact, could be applied to cinema. And the phrases, the concepts that he is developing throughout the article, I think are very useful concepts for talking about moving images as well as still images. For example, the clash between perspectivalism and description, I think, could easily be described in the film we just looked at. I'm sure you noticed the different kinds of styles in each shot, some of which are much more animated and handheld, and other shots that are much more formal compositions using traditional landscape perspectives. So this kind of conflicting visualities is something that is very inherent in cinema, especially a film like this that was made with all the scraps that he could bring together. Multiple visual subcultures, competing ocular fields, plurality of scopic regimes. In the film we looked at, ranging from the archival shots of the newsreels to the clandestine shots where the little hand camera is held so the police would not catch them, or to the reenactments, for example, the scene, the boats where they're chasing the Indian ship is completely dramatized. And normally we don't think of dramatization in documentary, but this documentary is a very rich field of competing visual styles, and dramatization is certainly one of them. His comment about how visuals regimes are in league with the scientific worldview and the bourgeois ethic certainly also applies to the cinema, but we can see the film we just looked at, according to his concept of internal contestations, can't we? Evans was very much opposed to the bourgeois ethic and the scientific worldview, and we can see his work as a kind of register of unease, of challenging the bourgeois ethic of the cinema industry. And this film is a great example of this kind of unease, this challenge. We can talk also about Jay's concept of emotional entanglements and disentanglements. This film is certainly playing with both, isn't it? It gives us dry information about the history of colonialism, and at the same time pulls at our heartstrings with sentimental images of families, of music, of visual arts, incorporating Indonesian performance arts, for example, is a very important aspect of this work. Erotic energies we'll come back to in the lecture number 2. And his concepts of narrativization, textualization, and their opposites. On the one hand, this is a story. On the other hand, this is the delivery of information. And all of these priorities are in conflict. At the same time, because of its messiness, its richness, we can also identify it in terms of this concept of the Baroque. There's a kind of madness in it. There's so much going on, and it ties it up, but barely, from footage that was originally so minimalist because it was clandestine. It was shot on borrowed cameras and stock. But it all comes together in this kind of excess, doesn't it? That I think Jay's concept of ocular madness can apply to. So in short, this film I chose because it's a good example of all of these things coming together, modes of knowledge, of social practice, of activism, for example, of recruitment, but also of affect. So I hope that this article that you hopefully read for today, you'll find relevant. The basic premise of this seminar, I'm going to wrap up in 5 minutes, keep on time. The basic premise is that cinema is the art form of the 20th century, the epitomous medium and art form of the 20th century, of 20th century visual culture and late modernity. All of the teleological thrusts that Martin Jay is talking about, starting with the Renaissance, you could argue, culminate in the 20th century cinema, whether we're talking about fiction cinema or documentary like the one we just saw, or experimental cinema that we'll be sampling in the screenings. And all of these things are going on in the cinema. It's a big phantasmagoria, isn't it? And no one knows this better than the Bollywood audience, right? All of these things come together in Bollywood: art, culture, hybridity, eclecticism, popular, industrial, creative, indexical, phantasmatic, narrative, descriptive, erotic, cerebral, politically complicit, as well as subversive. So hopefully in the next 2 weeks, we're going to get a sense of the richness of the cinema as a medium, using the discipline of film studies to look at it. So this seminar as a whole looks on 2 moments of unease in 20th century cinema, 2 alternative scoping regimes, to use Martin Jay's terminology. One is the committed documentary, and here it's embodied by the American activist newsreel group from the late 60s that epitomizes the New Left in the US. They're still active 60 years later. There you can see the tiny images. You can see one of them is a campus demonstration on the left from the late 60s in the US. So newsreel, committed cinema. And in the second half of the seminar, we're going to be talking about sexual representation and how could I not illustrate sexual representation but by an image from Bollywood for you, which is probably the most erotic and at the same time repressed cinema in the world. So we're talking in this seminar both about social practice, filmmakers who want to change the world, and affect, filmmakers who want to move you to turn you off. We're talking about both agitprop and eros. Now, coming back to Indonesia Calling, I think I've touched on the most important things about it for me, the reasons I selected it to show you. Do any of you, let's go 5 minutes over and see if any of you have any comments that you want to share about the Indonesia calling in relation to some of our objectives and goals for the seminar. What was your immediate response to this film? Why is this crazy foreigner showing us this film from 1946? Any comments or responses?
I think it did not appear to be very crazy because Evans is known to have done several films like this before as well. Spanish Shirt, for example. He has wherever, I mean, this is just an observation. This is just an observation because as far as I know, and I'm not very familiar with Evans's work, but wherever at that point of time, these contestations, these physical contestations were taking place, for example, in China or the Spanish Civil War. Evans went there and he made films on these contestations. So I think his commitment to producing that sort of cinema is also a part of this internal contestation that you're speaking of here. And yeah, that's
so there's method in his madness.
I don't think there's any madness there. I think it's all very methodical.
Okay.
Now, he lived incognito for 7 years, I think, when he was shooting the China film, 71 till 77. So obviously there's a lot of method. It's not madness.
Okay. There are wonderful stories about the making of the film.
Mm-hmm.
When they showed the footage to the editor said, "You can never make a film of this. This is so boring. If you can make a film of this, I could make Ben-Hur in my backyard." And somehow they managed. And they explained to me when I interviewed several of the artists that the final march across the bridge, well, the whole film, the ratio was 1-to-1. You never make a film on a 1-to-1 ratio. Those of you who are filmmakers know this. Normally, documentary filmmakers these days are made of a ratio of 70-to-1. So for every minute you use in the final edit, you throw out 69 minutes. They didn't throw out a single inch of stock. They were so poor. And the camerawoman I interviewed, she was his girlfriend. She stole him from his wife, and they went off to Australia together. A great woman. She told me that when she was shooting the harbor, she had to hide behind a rock because she almost got arrested, and that she was basically playing cat and mouse with the police the whole time she was shooting the shot. So it feels like a mad story, but on the screen for you it was methodical, cold, calculating political objectives.
Not cold and calculative, because there was one shot right at the middle, I think, where there's this angular, this arm drawing sketches of the Indonesian figure, which is isolated and wearing the sarong, and then there's the Dutch East Indies represented in squiggles and figures. That was seriously very good, very significant.
So the didactic element is very well taken care of.
Yes, I think so.
Anyone else? Yes, Rajni.
This is my first exposure to Joris Evans, and I think I'm still yet to sunk in a lot of content that the film displayed. But two things that eventually just emerge out for me. Firstly is the images of freedom struggle that I have seen of India is quite contrary to the image that I see in Indonesia. It's very different because what I see in what happened in my country during the 1930s and 40s, the kind of expressions, the kind of framing that people were into is completely different from what I see in the film. That is first observation that I noticed. The second thing that also strikes me is the overpowering narration.
I feel, sometimes at one point of time, I did not want to hear that narration, and I wanted to just look at the picture and make my own story. So probably, I think if I would definitely want to see the film again and see it without narration and see what's the impact it has. So those are just quick observation. I think I still want to see the film and absorb.
I think Evans would agree with you about the narration. He constantly pressured his editors to restrict the commentary, the voiceover commentary, but I think they felt in this one that the images were so poor, they had to compensate for the images. In fact, the images are not poor, the images are quite rich, but they felt this. And then the writer, Catherine Duncan, was trained in the theater, and I think she'd like to hear herself talk. She had a beautiful, elegant. When I interviewed her, I was completely overwhelmed, and so maybe there was that personal element in it about this is a beautifully written narrative. Let's use it maximum, and I think Evans agreed. He was a very respectful collaborator. And one of the things that is said about this narration, which was by Peter Finch, do you all know about this Oscar-winning leading man from Hollywood who did get his Oscar for?
Orson Welles?
No, Peter Finch.
Peter Finch, yes.
Anyway, what is said about it, it's the first narration Australians had ever heard in an Australian accent. So there was an affirmation not only of the Indonesian anti-colonial struggle, but also of the Australian anti-colonial struggle, interestingly, and of course, class struggle. So you're right, the narration is something to be turned off.
I also think Evans had a problem with finding the right mode of narration, because when he was doing Spanish Shirt, he rejected Orson Welles and instead wanted to take up Ernest Hemingway for the narration. So I think what I said previously about there being a method in his filmmaking, or in his propagandist attitude towards the filmmaking, I think he wanted to avoid this particular sort of theatrical representation, which Orson Welles embodied, which is why he took up Ernest Hemingway. So is it possible that it also applies to this film?
I think so. We're going to look at that film later, I think later on this week in a couple of days. And you'll notice that the narration only takes up 1/3 of the soundtrack, whereas this narration takes up, I think, 90% of the soundtrack. And you're aching to turn it off, or to hear, for example, the Indonesian music that's sort of crowded out by the voice. So it's an interesting point. Any final comment on this film? What were your impressions? And no one had ever seen it before, right? You're all virgin viewers of this. Any comment? Any final comment? Someone who hasn't spoken?
Okay. What I felt was, if you actually turn off the narrative and the narration and you watch the film, I can find a lot of images would be concurrent with battleship Potemkin. Like the ships, especially in the framing of the way the Indians turn back, and that frame where he's standing on the person who's looking there, and that I found a lot of it was like a reference to Battleship Potemkin. Also the way the steps were framed.
Odessa steps.
Yeah. The last.
I've never thought about the Odessa steps in this relation, but it's possible. But certainly they shared an aesthetic of the proletarian hero, didn't they?
Yeah.
And Evans was very much influenced by the Soviets. He knew Eisenstein, but he was much closer to Godovkin. And but it's a very good point. There, I think, at mid-century, from the 1920s onwards, there was a kind of romantic idealizing aesthetic of the heroic striker or worker or resistant, and that is there. He could not get this out of his system, and even these, these Australian workers, the Indonesian militants, they're framed, they're aestheticized as heroes, aren't they? A very good point. With regard to the harbor and the ships and the bridge, many people have attributed this to Eben's Dutch background, his closeness to the sea and his joy in harbors. His very first film was about a bridge over a harbor. And as a child of modernism, he was very interested in machines and structures. So was Eisenstein. Eisenstein trained as an architect, didn't he? Am I making that up?
I'm not sure of that, but then I can see, I find a lot of correlation.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot going on there. All right, so I'm 10 minutes over, and we shall start lecture 2 in 20 minutes. Is that all right, Abhishek? Do you think they can function with only a 20-minute break? Okay, lovely to get through the first hour with you, and we'll see you shortly.
I can go in with that agree. But there's one thing, the Vanessa steps or the giant staircase in Ukraine, they're supposed to be an optical illusion.
Yeah, also, no, but then this
How's that? Is it working? Yeah? Yeah. Okay, hour two. We're going to be talking a little bit more specifically about the discipline of film studies in this hour. And for this purpose, I asked you to read Richard Dyer. I looked everywhere for a little summary of film studies for those of you outside the discipline. And I'm not surprised that it was Richard Dyer whose work I found that was the most illuminating and concise. And can I get a sense if anyone had the time to look at Dyer? Okay, so I hope that you will be able to return to it. Basically, he wrote this in the 1990s, and basically he explained why cinema matters, why it is so important. And he talks about two different traditions within film studies, an aesthetic tradition and a cultural tradition. I think that we're going to be able to combine both over the next 2 weeks. The kinds of our activities that we'll be involved in include criticism, analysis, history, politics, and of course we can't exclude pleasure, the joy of looking at films together and thinking about cinematic pleasure as a specific history and cultural priority. There are some of his books. He's, like me, recently retired, and he's been extremely prolific throughout his career since the 1970s. You may already have run into some of his works on the star system, on race and racialization in cinema in the book called White, or his work on queer representation, his history of lesbian and gay film on the right, and in the middle one, a selection of essays on the culture of queers. Those are just some of his many books. He's also done a book on everything from serial killers, the film genre of the serial killer film, to a book on the Italian composer Nina Rota, to works on pornography, the work. So I'm glad that you were, if you don't already know his work, that I'm able to expose you. And just to recapitulate some of the things we touched on this morning, we are in the seminar looking at two of the alternative scoping regimes of 20th century cinema, committed documentary and activist work that tries to change the world. And for that reason, I'm assigning for tomorrow an essay I wrote almost 30 years ago on this objective, the will of documentary filmmakers to change the world. This was a time when I was beginning this study of events and committed documentary, and I needed to bring together a kind of synopsis of motivations and genres in this very rich tradition that no one had ever written about before. So for the first week, we'll be talking about this tradition, exemplified by events, but not restricted by to events. And in the one or two lectures at the end of the first week, we'll also be talking about the Indian tradition of political documentary, which is also very important. And I'm not an expert on the work that has taken place in Assam, but I know that in Assam also there's a very important history of documentary work, political documentary work. And then secondly, in the second week, sexual representation, which is a kind of very inclusive umbrella term for many different genres of cinematic expression, from experimental films to mass public narrative features, to art cinema, to pornography. We're not going to be looking at any pornography in this course. I'm saying this on record for the podcast. But there may be some works that you consider to be pornography. I have no idea. For me, pornography is not a pejorative term. So let's see how things unfold. But the two basic premises of the seminar, as I said, are history. We live in the age, the 21st century of social media, and many of you are working in this research area where we have access to everything online. And unfortunately, in concert with this age of social media, there's a kind of cultural amnesia or oblivion, a forgetfulness of media history, of the history of images, and we're going to try and rectify that in this course. And we're also going to look with scrutiny and detail at images on the screen, textuality, because images are so disposable and ephemeral in the 21st century online that we seldom look at them carefully and analyze them before they disappear. So we are going to do that as well, with a kind of real emphasis. This is why the assignment I'm asking you to do asks you to pick a text from the internet and to comment on it, analyze it, and reflect on it for your final assignment. Okay? And as in the first lecture, I would like to start with the screening. This time, half the length, it's only 10 minutes long. It's an Indian short from 20 years ago. I doubt if anyone here has seen it. Have any of you seen the film Bomb Gay? For me, it epitomizes a lot of the things that are going on in the huge field of sexual representation. It's a film that, as I said, is 20 years old, made in 1996 by a Mumbai filmmaker, Riyad Vinci Wadia. If any of you know the history of Bollywood, the name Wadia is important for you. The Wadia dynasty of movies was very important in Bollywood, and Riyad was the grandson of one of the moguls, not the Indian moguls, but the Bollywood moguls of Wadia movie tones. And he made a short film based on the poems of a friend of his named R. Raj Rao. Some of you are studying English literature and Indian English literature and poetry, so you may have run into R. Raj Rao. I know that Margarita has. Have any of you, the rest of you, read any of the novels or poems or plays by Rao? As Margarita will agree with me, he's deliberately provocative. He likes to get people upset and turned on and riled up. So I hope that you're all emotionally prepared for a series of short films based on his more provocative poems about Mumbai underground sexual life. And as you can see from the title Bomb Gay, he resisted, even in 1996, the recent change of the name of the city from Bombay to Mumbai, and that's embodied in the title Bomb Gay. So we are going to do that now. Let's see if I can find it on my USB.
I'm going live.
You were just trying to hog the spotlight. Okay. How soon is the speaker coming?
In a couple of minutes, I should think.
হস্টেলে মানে কোন হস্টেলে এক একটা হস্টেল তো এক একটা জায়গায় কোন হস্টেল তো বলতে হবে
Let me, in the meantime, show you Raj Rao's, oh, there it is, great. Raj Rao's latest book that came out this year called Criminal Love, Queer Theory, Culture and Politics in India. It's a very interesting book from Sage, and the distinguished author of the introduction to it is myself. Okay, so I urge all of you on Amazon India to buy it immediately. It's not expensive, it's 450 rupees. And he's, in addition to being a novelist and a poet and a playwright, he's also an essayist. He often, he's had I think a weekly column in the Pune Times for many years, and here are the titles of his essays that sort of will give you a kind of background to this film. Sex, Sexuality, Gender, and Culture. What he is trying to do is adapt the turmoil in Western sexual politics, the very fierce debates that are going on, both in queer theory, in feminism, and in the streets, sex identity activism, to an Indian context. And I think that's on a lot of people's minds here, and I think he does a pretty good job of raising key questions. His next chapter is identities, then normativities, homosociality, homophobia, lesbianism, perversion, historiography, and then finally the politics of Section 377 IPC. So since he made this poetry and this, are we all set up? Since he wrote this poetry and made this film, he's written about 6 novels that I also highly recommend. Okay, so we are all set. We'll start at the beginning. So we can get the lights?
Can you just test before we?
Okay.
Yeah, like let's just test before we.
Yeah, let's test. Okay, one of the features of the Indian censorship system is as a deterrent, very intimidating deterrent. And Riyadh simply never submitted this film to be censored because he knew it would not be approved. And so the film circulated, sorry, the film circulated, there we go, is it on now? Okay, the film
was never submitted to the censors, and therefore circulated underground for the last 20 years and abroad. And there are so many films made in this context that have had similar careers that we just never hear about because it doesn't have the certificate. There's nothing especially scary about this film. Literature students run into scatological imagery all the time. There's no explicit sexual imagery unless you consider the fried eggs on Rahul Bose's chest pornographic. Is Rahul Bose still around?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was the young Rahul Bose. But it separates the cinema corpus into the forbidden and the approved, and has a very, as you know, this debate has been going on for a whole century, and situates the cinematic corpus into the forbidden and the approved. And so it's sort of interesting to look at, again, we used the word clandestine when we were talking about Indonesia Calling. This also, in many respects, is a clandestine film, a forbidden film, and it's interesting to look at it in this respect. If we think of this as a case study, how would the discipline of film studies approach or understand or analyze this repressed, forbidden, clandestine text? Well, there are lots of things that you could be saying about this film. And as you know, the 1990s was a very important period in Indian history, Indian film history. The conservative turn in Bollywood in the context of the advent of neoliberalism and the open economy. And I suppose with the conservative turn in Bollywood, it was inevitable that the underground began stirring as it did with this film. Why don't we try out certain angles that I've listed here, 6 or 7 angles, and see how you would, having seen the film only once, how you would identify this film, how you would describe this film, how you would analyze this film. In terms of its artistry, in terms of its formal achievement, how would you respond? This genre, the collection of short literary adaptations, is not very common, especially in India. How did you respond to it as a innocent spectator who had never seen the film? Anyone want to jump in? I noticed only one audible response from this group during the 10 minutes, so it's a complete mystery to me how you are responding to the film. Does anyone want to start?
That audible response would be when he was saying that one wonders if she's making a fuss. Are you talking about that?
Right. So you seized on a familiar trope that is the conjugal trope that's omnipresent in Indian cinema, the marriage trope.
not only, I don't think it's the marriage trope, it's rather the proposal trope, or rather, the past trope, line marna as it is said, that sort of thing. Because it's just a random observation on his part whether she's making a pass.
And there are certain taboos in that moment, the interclass taboo, the intergenerational taboo, the older woman making a pass at the younger man.
More than that,
More than that, the woman making a pass.
the woman making a pass. I think she's seized on the right point.
And in fact, that's the unique moment in the film where
It is heterosexual.
heterosexual is the premise.
It's heteronormative.
In fact,
Heteronormative. Okay.
in fact, that whole episode that's talking about vegetable curries in the kitchen,
Children.
connected to children, is the most heteronormative of the episodes, isn't it?
There's also, I think, if one can use that word, there's also a sense of very strident upper class homonormativity in the film. In that, especially in that part where this man is being beaten up by the wounds. There's a homonormativity, if one can use that word. I'm not sure.
That's very specifically class flavored, yes. And
it's elitist at one point.
Yeah. Almost all of his work is about interclass. I'm now speaking of Raj Rao. Is about interclass sexual encounters.
Yes.
And for example, Boyfriend is a romance between an upper caste intellectual and a Dalit working class young man. And it's either explicit in this film or it's just presumed. The six men enjoying the spaghetti dinner together has a kind of unspoken class presumption, doesn't it? But it's not explicit.
But there's one thing that is that gives away this class construction, that is lifting the spaghetti and doing what an Indian woman would do or an Indian man would do, touching it to see if it is cooked yet, which is not something that an Italian spaghetti comes from Italy or from America, something that an American or an Italian wouldn't do. But this is something that every Indian will do. If they're cooking something that's made of wheat or if it is rice, they'll touch it with the forefinger and the thumb and see if it's cooked. So that gives away there's a crack in this construction, this veneer of respectable elitist upper class. That's very constructive.
Okay, that didn't even occur to me, but it's a good point. Anyone else?
No, I quite didn't get it like that. You mean to say that Italians, when they cook spaghetti?
No, I didn't mean that specifically. I said that this act that comes at the penultimate hour of cooking, this touching of grain to see whether the food has been cooked with your fingers is not something that somebody in the West would do. I'm placing a very intentionally placing a divide between the West and the East. Western, cooking habits and Indian cooking habits that way.
My sort of personal addition to that analysis is that probably both Riyadh and Raj are domestically challenged. Riyadh being brought up in a family of millionaires and having all his food prepared for him by cooks, has probably never cooked spaghetti in his life and doesn't know how to cook spaghetti, and that's why that moment looks so awkward.
No, but this is very true actually. Even if I have pasta, I'll do the same thing. Like,
But somebody cooking pasta in America, for example, let's say I have a friend in Tampa in Tampa Bay who loves cooking spaghetti and loves eating spaghetti, but she would never pinch it with her fingers to see if it's been cooked.
no, but this is
Good pasta that mentioned you have to cook for 10 minutes, they'll just trust them.
Yeah, there's the point.
Yeah.
This lack of trust, this lack of
This is not a lack of trust. This is something that it's a visual cue that we have picked up, like from watching from watching cooking within our family. It's cue that we have picked up and it's like ingrained in us now. it's something that it's like
It's a cultural signifier.
reflexive. We just do that.
It's an involuntary cultural signifier.
But it's very symptomatic because we're fascinated by this little gesture, and it's symptomatic of some kind of incongruency or deeply buried connotation, cultural connotation.
Yes, probably cultural, psychological sort of thing.
But then I think this also embeds the film in India. Like, you know, because
It does.
it's
Or
not
maybe
about-
they could have used it intentionally
Yeah, like, you know,
to embed the film. I think the entire film has these, what she uses the term embeds.
yeah.
There are such,
And
moments.
it's especially in Mumbai, because you know the whole act of, you know, like the thing where they grow up onions, and the word term that they use is kanda, which is a very Mumbai term. It's not used anywhere else. I am sure you would have missed that because you don't understand kanda. Kanda is onion. So but in other places, it's called like we call it pyaz. So and I'm sure they are.
Of course, this is Bombay, isn't it?
This is Bombay, so it locates the film in Bombay, like, you know,
And not only that, but in fact, the whole urban landscape is very present throughout the film. It's a city film among everything else.
Yeah.
And the urban landscape is crucial, but it's not the typical Mumbai urban landscape that we see in Bollywood. It's the underground.
Yeah.
And
also it does, so sorry to interrupt you, it also does not romanticize the whole idea of the train journey, because it shows it in its very grotesque form, like, you know, the
crispy and grotesque.
Yeah, very, like, you know, because train journeys are normally very romantic. Train journeys normally in cinema is very romanticized.
Also, the shots that they have used of the train journey are shots that are typically suggestive of that, what she says, the romanticized train journey in Bollywood. Not only in Bollywood, in all Indian film
In
spaces.
cinemas that we have encountered, like, you know, the train journeys are like, but then this kind of unpacks that idea, and
Yes, it does.
uses a very, like, a grotesque form of
Because the train journey does not culminate or begin from a lesser point to a larger point, or from a less fortunate point to a more fortunate point. Rather, it takes him from one destination into the underground.
Yeah.
That's what.
okay, anyone else on a alternative point from these films? Yes.
A few images were very striking in the film, which in a way suggest the act of penetration, right? Whether it is vertical penetration when the onions are being lifted up, right? Or the act of getting into the train, or the act of getting into the underground, right? So that penetration comes very, very clearly through these suggestions.
So Wadya is...
This, in fact, reminded me of T.S. Eliot's poem.
Which poem?
It's a love song of Alfred Prufrock.
Yeah.
Right? So the act of entering a room that is that comprises of elite women, and for a middle-aged man, that act is of entering the room is so very difficult. So that virtual penetration that I could see through the images.
That's also a very interesting point. It's almost like a glimpse of visuals and their symbolic valence, connection to the theme of the poems, isn't it? Which comes out explicitly later on when we see the steeple from the cinema, right? And there's this explicit phallic object, but we've been feeling that throughout the film, right?
Also, the shot where they use Rahul Bose and he has fried eggs covering his nipples. See, there are other men, there are nude men whose nipples are not covered, like in that way, in the same shot. But then, is then Rahul Bose's nipples covered because he's supposed to represent a woman? Because normally, if you expose the nipples of a woman, it is considered nudity. But if you expose the nipples of a man, it is not considered nudity. So this dichotomy, like, is he then like, it's just a question. It's something that I want an answer. Like, something that
Or
we
maybe
discuss
what
with
follows after that particular shot, there's this set of lines that follows after this particular shot where the film says that the purity of love is subverted. Maybe eggs here would represent a sort of because these are fried eggs, something that you eat at breakfast. An edibility and a consumption, a need to be consumed, probably, that directly moves away from the sense of love into lust, into physicality, rather than emotionality.
I also am reminded of how they shot that episode surreptitiously and on the fly in the library without permission, and got away with it. And it has this kind of immediacy, vividness that comes from stress that I detect in it as well. They must have brought the eggs in and put them on very quickly, and fracturing this holy space of silence and study with this eruption of desire, of naked bodies, of repressed energy comes up. That's maybe the.
Or maybe it was intended. It was probably their intent. The filmmakers' intent to locate this subversion of love, this physical act of a couple of men having sex within what is normative, silent, and sacred and hallowed. Maybe that was what they intended it to be.
So let's see if we have any other disciplinary angles that helps us understand this film. Any other contexts that help you situate this film or understand this film in terms of national context, international context, institutional frameworks, any other insights into this?
To speak of the national context, then I would locate it. There's this thing, North India versus the rest of the country. This film is very difficult to locate on the axis.
Because Mumbai is neither north or south, and
there's a lot of south in Mumbai. There's a lot of north in Mumbai also.
Yeah, a lot of I see, particularly like what is that? Kantaban. Kantaban is a stereotypical. Shantaban is the stereotypical housemaid. The name itself, that's one thing that you find in Shantaban. So there you find that, and what I found striking, I don't know, is that the humor, the apparent humor that has been attempted here, it's a very perhaps a camouflage of the violence, so evidently that is underlying there. And another thing, what Arjun just brought up regarding the egg, that what came to my mind is perhaps if you see it in the context of gender studies, or women representing fluidity is one concept. So when we brought in the egg, perhaps he was just trying to making a pointer towards the fluidity. When he pointed to the state, when he brought in the image of the egg, because an egg is a fluid. I don't know, maybe to me it seemed like that.
It's concerned with it's something that is enclosed within a fluid chamber of the womb, isn't it? The egg it's been fried now. It's fried and ready to be eaten. So probably there. It's very symbolic, one can say.
Very symbolic.
Very symbolic.
So I feel here like the egg usually also refers to being female because a man cannot have eggs. Okay. And in this case, the position that they were in, like that, the two terms that are generally used for the homosexual, that is top and bottom in case of male. So I think because Roald Bosch was in the bottom position, he wants more to be that, like a woman. I think that is why this externally like eggs were brought in.
I made the point already about homonormativity because
But
this
you
idea
didn't,
of
you didn't talk about tops and bottoms.
yes,
I think you on to something there, and about the association of the feminine with the bottom. But continue.
yes, I was speaking about that sort of homonormativity because homonormativity again, like heteronormativity. I'm not sure if there is a term.
I'm very uncomfortable with the term homonormativity. Like, it's making me very uncomfortable. Because,
Would you cite your objection?
I would like, it's making me uncomfortable because then it's like reverse racism.
No, it's not reverse. What she said just now about tops and bottoms, there are two terms associated with the homosexual thing. This is an example of homonormativity.
It's a term that's come into popularity maybe in the last generation to refer to the assimilative goals of the mainstream liberal gay rights movement and their aspiration to enjoying all the benefits of capitalist society without overturning any of the values and structures of capitalist society. So that's how it's used.
And if sexuality is a curve, then there's no way one can, just like one cannot accept that there's anything called straight or gay or bisexual. If sexuality is a curve as we understand it, then if gender is also that fluid, then one cannot also normativize homosexuality into two categories, top, bottom. One cannot do that. It is impossible. And it is not only impossible, it is very unjust. It is unfair. So that sort of fluidity is something one cannot really, stick at. One has to move further into the analysis of this particular, space.
So Riyadh is being cautious and conservative and unwilling to challenge some of these.
I think my personal observation would be.
Also, we have to look at the time of the film. It's 96. Then, it's like today we are a lot more articulate about these issues than we were in 96. So maybe this itself is a rupture. So
it is a rupture. If you go by the historical thing, it is a rupture.
Then maybe we should not use homonormative for this film because this itself just the timing of the film itself will, I think we should caution us against using a term like that for this film because
no, I'm not using the term for the film. I'm using the term for the attitude.
Yes.
I'm using the term for the attitude, just like she said, she differentiated homosexuals into tops and bottoms.
I think your point is that in the context we need to respect the uniqueness and the courage and the iconoclasm of this film. It's completely alone.
Yeah.
But one can also, sorry to interrupt, Thomas, but there's also one thing, she what she said is, I can understand what she said, but then in India, in the context of India, homonormativity as we see it today is something that owes its origins to this particular time when the film was being made. So one cannot exclude the idea that Indian homonormativity began from there. If I read this book, I know Parmesh Sahani. What was the name of the book? I forget.
He's the playwright. Yes.
Yeah. Not only a playwright. His PhD thesis was on homosexuality and Bollywood. I don't remember. Gay Bombay. That was the name of the book. Now that book shows, obviously Parmesh Sahani makes a point there, and that Parmesh Sahani, if you look at him, his work, his work, belongs to this very time. So one cannot entirely reject the idea of homonormativity in the film. One cannot do that. Of course, one has to respect the historicity of the film. So one cannot label it or blame it as being homonormative, but one cannot also reject the idea that it is homonormative in many ways. Also, I think at the end of the film ended rather fast. Maybe the time frame was important. What I think that the agenda the film started with, the filmmaker was in doubt of his agenda at the end of the film. Maybe it opened up a different dimension of representation for him entirely.
It's hard to know, to bring in a kind of biographical criticism.
It's also very staccato.
Uh-huh.
It's also very staccato.
And maybe the staccato quality also reflects a kind of personal uncertainty on the part of
you. When you began the introduction by saying the formal achievement, I think this staccato movement of the shots and the frames, they are also a sort of a representation that the sort of lives that these homosexuals or gay people or trans or lesbian people have to lead. From pillar to post, much like the picaresque rogue in 17th, 18th century English literature.
Okay, anyone who hasn't spoken want to chime in on this film and how we can use the discipline of film studies to understand and describe. Anyone who hasn't spoken?
I'm just reminded about the time frame, 96, when we are talking about, there was another actually equally kind of disturbing the heteronormative kind of structure. It's like Fire. There was a film, it was in the same time frame, 96.
Yeah.
They both were released at the same
time.
Yeah.
Fire actually comes maybe 2 years after, but you're right, it's almost exactly the same time frame, and it, because it was distributed, unleashed the controversy and the violence that this film would also have sparked had it not remained underground. So it's an interest. I'm so glad you brought that up because it's an important comparison, and it also contrasts the male universe and the female universe.
Fire was out in 1996. 96.
96, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm mistaken. I'm so sorry.
So that's what it is, isn't it? Because the film is named Born Gay, but it speaks explicitly about the lives of gay men.
So this is the male Fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got one insight out of this discussion. That's great. Have any of you run into the book on Fire by Sohini Ghosh?
No.
You should find it. It's a wonderful book. I co-edited it. It's part of Queer Film Classics, a series that we publish in Canada. And Sohini Ghosh, we will be reading a short piece by her later in the seminar, and we'll be looking at one of her films. So I'm glad this came up. And it's interesting if we pursue the comparison. How many have seen Fire? Almost everyone. Isn't that interesting? Cooking is very important in Fire also, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kitchen and all.
So what can we do with that? Cooking. I mean, it's their livelihood of this family, isn't it?
Cooking could well be one of the tropes for the narrativizing of the entire film.
But cooking in Fire is a gender-assigned task, isn't it? Whereas here, it's this kind of...
Yeah, the fried egg and all.
Yeah,
cooking.
But here, there's the hands are seen. Nobody knows who's cooking.
Mm-hmm.
There's ambiguity there.
But it's not the maid servant.
No, one cannot come to that sort of presupposition.
It's not the maid servant. It's a male hand, isn't it?
It could be a male hand.
Now you're being argumentative.
I'm sorry.
No. Okay.
I think, I'm sorry.
It's a male hand,
We have an exam today in the institution.
No, we're wrapping up, Neha. I'm very sorry to go over. Any final question? I don't know why I'm losing my voice. It's because it's so exciting to be here. I'm sorry. Any final point? Okay. So we will continue this thread in tomorrow's lectures, but meanwhile, I want to see you at 4 o'clock for the screenings, and we will be talking about committed documentary we'll be looking at committed documentary archive in the screenings at 4 o'clock. So we'll see you all there. Thank you.
Thank you.